Do you know the first Thanksgiving was celebrated in, as I take you back to grade school, 1621?
Oh.
Do you know when Thanksgiving officially became an official holiday?
1622?
1863.
That was close.
In other words, trust the process. Okay? Some of these things take time. Even Thanksgiving as a holiday itself, Dani Sureck, it takes time. There is a process.
Okay.
You need more football. You need more factoids. Do you realize the tradition of football on Thanksgiving, as you can tell, I Googled up a few factoids, began in 1876. It was Yale against Princeton, but the first NFL games weren't played until Thanksgiving 1920. And the Lions have played on Thanksgiving every year since 1934. But you might not be as interested in that as, here's your trivia question. She's still looking at me for something that's going to resonate. The average number of calories each person consumes on the Thanksgiving holiday. Care to guess?
3,000?
Oh, good. That's the low end. There's a range.
Okay.
3 to 5?
I'm going to go to 4,500.
Wow. 3,150 to 4,500 is the range of calories consumed on the Thanksgiving holiday.
Well, if this were the Price is Right, I would win because Darren went over.
For the lightning round, for the bonus prize, can you guess the average American's consumption of fat grams on Thanksgiving?
Well, what is a normal? What's a normal serving in a day? What's
I'm
recommended
going to
for
say
that?
29, Bob.
So I don't know what's normal. I was going to say like 60, but now that sounds ridiculous. I'll just stay with 60.
Well, Darren got 2/3 of it. It's 229.
Holy shit.
Oh, so I win.
Bob.
I win again.
And by the way, it takes
there.
it takes 9.5 hours for the average American male to burn 4,500 calories. Just to let you know. So it's a lot of walking around the neighborhood.
You want to know something? Knowing that information, Paul, is not going to stop me or how I eat Thanksgiving meals. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't really know.
Is this the point at which you bring up the green bean casserole?
I don't think either one of you really have to worry about calories. Come on
I don't know
now.
that I'll be having green bean casserole for Thanksgiving, unfortunately, this year.
Wow.
I know.
You're no longer trusting your process.
No, well, I love green bean casserole. My sister makes it the best, and I'm spending Thanksgiving with a friend and her family, and so I don't know that it will be there. And for Friendsgiving, I'm not making it because nobody else will eat it. So why would I put in the time and effort to make an entire dish that nobody else is going to eat?
Because you like it.
But I can make other things that I also like. That's worth my time.
Like?
Well, this year, since you asked, I am trying out a new baked mac and cheese recipe that looks really good. I'm also doing stuffing, and then I've got some rolls that I'm going to make like a fancy butter and put on top.
Is that gutsy? Is that risky to try a recipe for the first time when you're cooking
Yes
for others
and
on
no.
Thanksgiving?
I figured in worst case scenario, it is pasta and cheese, right? So can it really be that bad?
I want to know what fancy butter is.
Like mixing garlic or some like spices in it.
A little bit later, we'll get into let the rooks cook, but that's totally different. Has nothing to do with the Thanksgiving meal.
Are the two of you? Here's the better question: are the two of you cooking or providing anything for your Thanksgiving meals?
Yes, I told my wife that I would cook everything.
Whoa!
No, come on now.
I want to see
Are you serious?
pictures.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to. I also.
Under no circumstances does anyone share Darren's story with my wife. Capiche?
Yeah, I mean, because
I don't need any help.
my
looking
wife
bad.
would rather not host a Thanksgiving because I would rather not go anywhere on Thanksgiving. So we are hosting, and that's how I.
I'm
get
very
to host.
impressed, Darren. I can't wait to see pictures. And Paul, I assume you're just showing up.
It's not that exciting.
Just because
First
I'm
of all,
not
it's a
cooking,
brunch.
Darren, or Dani, doesn't mean I'm not providing. I have other tasks that I've been assigned on Thanksgiving Day as we are hosting people at Casa Calvisi. Bingo card.
I'll have to bring that back next year. It's been a minute.
So if here's an off-the-wall question. If the Houston game was a Thanksgiving dish, what would it be? There's some things to like about it.
Obviously, Dani would not say green bean casserole.
Ultimately distasteful, but you know what? There were certain aspects of the meal
It was edible.
that was, it's more than edible, right? There were some highlights of the meal. Overall, though, I guess, indigestion at the very end. I don't know how to describe it, but
Probably taking the parallel a little too far, Paul. That's
I
probably
guess
what's
maybe
happening
mashed
here.
potatoes. Like I love mashed potatoes, and then it's because I love them so much, I feel like I get a stomach ache from eating too much of them, right? So it's a little like displeasure at the end, I guess, from a stomach ache, and that might be a good comparison.
by the way, do you know the Butterball Turkey Talk line receives about 100,000 calls, and now in 2023, you can text the Butterball Turkey Talk line, and if you need a little help with your holiday
Why
meal.
would you? What does that mean? Why are you calling them for help?
Well, how
To
do
cook your turkey.
Yeah, I mean, someone like me.
Not that we're having turkey, but I'm just saying.
I don't hate that. I think turkey's pretty overrated, unless it's like a smoked turkey. But a traditional Thanksgiving
We're
turkey
just
doesn't
doing it.
move
We're
the
doing
needle
a
for me.
brunch, so
I'm glad
Oh,
guys
so are you
brought
making
up
like
turkey.
eggs?
I'm making eggs and
Oh.
ham and a French toast casserole and bacon and yeah.
Do you know there are 4 towns in the United States of America named Turkey, and one is in Arizona? And
No
that'll do it for your
way.
Thanksgiving factoids.
People are like, "Are we going to talk about Cardinals or
Exactly.
Yeah,
what
we've
the
lost
hell?"
everybody at
Exactly.
this point.
So there we go. Kyler Murray, game 2. Here was my analogy. Do you guys play golf?
No,
I play
don't
golf.
do that either.
I play golf about twice a year. And after about 6 months off, you go out and you golf and you're like, oh boy, this could be bad, making my debut all over again. But you keep it simple, and the front nine's okay because you're keeping it simple. You're not taking a big backswing. You're hitting the 3-wood instead of the driver. And then as you make the turn, you start feeling yourself. You're like, all right, you know what? I'm going to let her rip. I'm going to take a mighty swing here. I'm going to carry that bunker. I'm going to aim for the pin. And then all of a sudden things deteriorate. Not as good as the front nine, even though you supposedly had knocked the rust off on the front nine. That's my analogy for Kyler. A little bit. You know, there he was in the first game, and they put the L into ATL, and you know what? Everything came together. In game 2 for Kyler, maybe there were a few throws that he was trying to get a little something extra on, and just weren't there because obviously there were at least 3 throws he would love to have back. 3 throws that I think were sticking with him.
So you're saying the interception, the throw to McBride, and what was the third
The
one?
Elijah Higgins,
Oh yeah,
the missed Hollywood deep shot that was picked. Yeah, that one there. So those were the 3 at least.
Yeah,
McBride,
I
Higgins,
think those are fair. Yes.
and the deep shot to Hollywood. That should have been 6, just like it easily could have been 6 the week before to Hollywood.
Agree.
I wonder how much is rust in terms of hasn't played a lot of football in a long time, or how much is rust in the sense of it's different preparing with a new staff in practices rather than games, of not having the preseason or the full training camp or those faster paced practices. Because from week 1 to week 2, we didn't see the false start. We didn't see the delay of games. So in terms of handling a football game, that seemed Kyler was more comfortable in that sense. Post-game, Kyler talked about the footwork. And I believe it was the McBride throw he was specifically talking about on his end. And that's something that we've heard from quarterbacks coach Izzy Wolfork about what this coaching staff is having to adjust a little bit, is how they want the footwork done. Offensive coordinator Drew Petzing talked about that to the media Tuesday as well. I'm wondering if how much of that is just Kyler, not necessarily rust, but having to adjust to the new pieces of the offense still. I think about the fumble, the handoff with James Conner of Conner clearly thought that was his ball to take, or was that communication with Kyler? Was the decision made too late? What was the process there? Is that something with the handoff? Is the communication a little different than what Kyler's used to? So I'm not sure if it's rust in terms of not having played football in a long time, or more just having to make those little changes consistently throughout an entire game still.
Playing his first road game. It was a lot noisier in that building than I remembered.
For a crowd that was not clearly not sold out, it was loud.
I mean, a crowd that was hungover from the Morgan Wallen concert.
Or Pitbull. They were both downtown.
So there was all that. It was a lot louder than I ever remember playing, although we haven't played a ton of games in Houston. So I do give the Houston fans credit on that one. There was also, wait for it, a game of film on Kyler in this offense. So to what degree did Houston, D'Amico Ryans, and, wait for it, Matt Burke, former Cardinals D-line coach who has a very good knowledge of Kyler, and seemed to be a pretty effective game plan that on almost all third downs, and most definitely fourth downs, they brought the heat, tried to speed things up, speed up the decision-making. So that was all in play and was different than his debut against Atlanta. He was also under center less often, 5 times versus 9. And Now, look, I don't have the ability to see the replays down in the sideline, and I didn't go back and watch the TV copy, but the 48-yard strike to start the game to Rondale Moore, absolutely beautiful ball.
Perfect.
Was that under center? Was that a play action?
No, I'm pretty sure that. Well, oh no.
I think it was under center, and it was play action. I should know this before I crack the mic. I apologize. But my point is, and everyone's keeping score, how many times under center. I not necessarily care as much about under center versus shotgun, but I would like to see James Conner downhill. Just like, seconds on the stuffing, please. More James Conner downhill.
He looked really good for a lot of that game. And then the Texans started stuffing him a little bit late. Speaking of stuffing.
It became feast or famine
there you go.
for James Conner.
Here we go.
Keep it going.
It was seemingly either an 11-yard run or no soup for you.
I understand that reference, actually.
Nobody has
My
soup.
dad's favorite show.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Hi, Danny's
Oh,
dad.
sorry. I didn't mean
Now-
it in a bad way, Paul.
Now, good night, everybody. Drive safely.
Do you want him to talk about the purge again?
No, please. It's a holiday. I mean, we can't do. If you want to talk, Die Hard, we can talk about
Yes,
that or
Die Hard,
what have you.
definitely a Christmas movie. We'll get to that
honestly,
in a couple weeks.
I mean, nobody has time for the purge or the purge anarchy, the first purge or a forever purge or the purge election year.
There you go.
No time for that.
It's funny that you guys are talking about rust because I felt like there might have been there might be a different kind of rust for Kyler besides just what happens on the field. And I'm wondering about the post-game stuff. It took him a while after the game to be ready to get ready to leave and to go talk to the media. And he's done that in the past. So it's not brand new, but he took this game hard. I mean, you mentioned the throws he wish he could have had back. I felt like this one was one where he definitely felt like he was the one who messed them up in terms of not being able to be successful. And that's probably fair in a lot of ways. It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. But I'm also wondering if he's going to have to go through we talked about the mental part of coming back on the knee. What about the mental part of the rest of it? The mental part of having the weight of the team on your shoulders, knowing that you have to perform. He's done it his whole life, but he just had like 11 months off from it. And I just wonder if that's also some rust he has to knock off.
And this is a different type of team that Kyler has had before. We've seen that they have the personnel to be competitive. He doesn't have a Larry Fitzgerald. He doesn't have a DeAndre Hopkins. Trey McBride's been playing well, but Zach Ertz has been hurt. I feel like, too, there's so many different pieces of this offense that his role is probably having to change. We've talked about as a leader in the locker room, off the field, but I'm sure it's having to change in terms of how you are having to elevate the players around you in probably a way he hasn't really had to so far.
It's his team. I mean, there's no question. It's his team in all aspects. He's now paid like an elite quarterback. He's under that contract. And fourth quarter is where elite quarterbacks win games. And I just think it was, look, if you told me when Kyler came back, if it would be the absolute reverse of what we've seen, that would have been my forecast. My forecast would have been, okay, the arm talent and the accuracy and the anticipation is all money. And it's all right there because you can drill that every single day in practice. But the running ability, that's going to take a little bit of time, and he's probably running more like a 4.5. But no, right out of the gates, he's 4.3 Kyler Murray. Even more so, he's not stepping out of bounds. I mean, it's Kyler Murray who's getting upfield and taking some shots. He's running with as much urgency as we've ever seen, to the point where we even asked the head coach about it on his TV show this week. Are you coaching that into him? Have you tried to elevate the aggressiveness of his run game? And the answer was no. That's Kyler, which I think is a huge indicator as to how ultra competitive he is right now. And it's another reason why he sat in front of that locker for dang near a half hour in full uniform, staring into the abyss of that locker, mulling and thinking over what just went down, talking to his quarterback coach, and then being very reflective in the press conference and very hard on himself and taking more accountability than I've ever heard, using the words I, me, and I mean, there's no doubt to me that he's evolved in that category. And it makes sense because if there is one word, at least to me, that you would attach to this coaching staff, Jonathan Gannon, Monty Ossenfort, in this new regime, it is, everybody now, accountability. That's what they came in trying to. In fact, the owner, Michael Bidwell, said it upon making the coaching change in January, February. Said, this is an area this team needs to improve, accountability. And it seems like Kyler's really taken that to heart. So when maybe in his view, to your point, Dani, a lot of that loss was on him, it really hit him hard.
I feel the same way, even after the win, when he had the interception on the pass to McBride, post-game when he was asked about it, after the Falcons game, of he took responsibility, took accountability, and that's what look, that's part of the job. When you sign up and you sign the contract to be a franchise quarterback, that is part of what you are signing up to. So yes, it is great to see Kyler step into that role and step into it so early once he has made his return. That's also the expectation, in my eyes, moving forward. When you talk about his legs and the fact that that's been a surprise to you, I had said I wondered if this coaching staff was going to challenge him to use his legs differently, of maybe not rolling out backwards 15, 20 yards. And while he has done that, I have noticed the way that Kyler seems to, I don't have the numbers, seems to hang in the pocket and rely on his protection just a hair longer than what we've seen. That's what he did on that 48-yard bomb touchdown pass to Rondale Moore. He was hanging in the pocket. I think you notice Kyler running through the pocket a little more. Seems like he is not welcoming the hits, but he would go down pretty early, right? He would go down previous years. I feel like he's letting defenders get closer to him, and he's not necessarily diving head first, right? He's going legs for, like, I just feel like there's little things probably from this staff of, it might not look super different if you're just casually watching the game. But I feel like when you're watching how Kyler is using his legs, you can find some little details as to maybe some changes that have been made in that part of his game.
By the way, Rondale Moore on the 48-yard touchdown strike, fourth play of the game, that was not his first read. His first read was Hollywood Brown. And then, as Jonathan Gannon shared with the media, Drew Petzing was like, hit the post, and Kyler saw exactly what the OC was seeing and then launched it. And that was the longest air yards catch of Rondale Moore's career, according to the analytics. So there was that. It didn't seem, though, and this is only a guess, but you were both in Houston, you both watched every single snap. It didn't seem like they moved the pocket as much with Kyler in game two. The boots, the waggles, the rollouts, moving the pocket.
I felt like, especially early in that game, I felt like Kyler was making a concerted effort to stand in the pocket, a normal pocket, more than I'd ever seen him before.
Wow.
That's just me watching. I mean, I don't have any analytics to back that up, but it sure looked that way, especially early in the game.
Here's the other thing, and Jonathan Gannon mentioned this after the game when I asked about, okay, look, you hit big on that first drive, but then downfield passing was a challenge, quite often the rest of the game. And he mentioned that Houston went into that too high shell coverage that a lot of teams have used against Kyler over the years. And I'm wondering to what degree is that still a challenge for Kyler in this offense. Not to say there weren't open players, because Trey McBride was open, Elijah Higgins was open, there were some other, but teams are going to continue to employ that strategy so they can keep their eyes on Kyler Murray, so they can keep everything in front of them and then challenge the Cardinals to establish a long drive, go without any unforced errors, be precise in the passing game, and then load up against James Conner. I am curious to see between now and the end of the season how many more teams go with that look, because that seemed to be the adjustment in the Cliff Kingsbury era that the Cardinals never made it a resulting adjustment to, and they just never quite figured that out. So, and I wonder if Matt Burke knew that, having been on that staff, and that's why he didn't hesitate to go into that scheme.
Does it change if you have a receiver with the size of Michael Wilson, if he's able to be out there and playing?
Yes.
He missed with a shoulder injury?
No doubt. The Greg Dortch, where 4th and 3, and he catches it just shy of the sticks. Does Michael Wilson somehow bowl or power his way through tacklers to pick it up?
I know the pass wasn't great, but I'm thinking the Hollywood Brown, right? If you got someone who's a little taller, a little bigger, does that make any sort of difference on what ended up being an interception?
Yep, no doubt. No doubt. So, and Zach Pascal isn't available because of injury as well. But Greg Dortch, I mean, there was that one pass, the out to the sideline, and then he got hit. He literally got launched into the air. I mean, he's a $175. I mean, he's like a projectile. He just got thrown into the air.
Did you see the Good Morning Football Angry Run segment?
I did.
The
Really
way
well
that
done.
Kyle Brandt
Yes.
was, he wasn't even talking about Greg Dortch. The way he was passionately screaming, yelling at me through the screen was incredible. I was like, I know Greg Dortch. I already like Greg Dortch, but holy cow, like I'm a fan of Greg Dortch after watching Good Morning Football Angry Runs.
Please go to azcardinals.com to see that clip. Definitely worth
This is a sidebar now, but the things he comes up with to say when he is
Kyle Brandt?
likely ad-libbing as he's watching these is so incredible. Like how he was describing Dortch was just hysterical.
The fact that I think to my younger days when I first saw him on Real World Chicago on MTV back in a long time ago.
What?
Oh yeah, that's where Kyle Brandt first did something.
I did not know that.
I did not know that.
He was on the Chicago version of the Real World back when like it was still somewhat realistic.
Strangers living in a house together.
Strangers living in a house. My wife and I would watch it every time it came on.
So how would you describe his persona on Real World? Which personality type was he?
Well, at that time,
'Cause they always
he
had
probably was
different-
so young because I don't know if you guys know this, but he was on a soap opera for a while. And
No,
then-
I
I
did
didn't know
not
any
know
of
that.
this.
Oh,
No
yeah,
wonder
he
he's
was
so
on
theatrical.
He was on a soap for a while.
Because that's like, when he does angry runs, that's like performance art.
Oh yeah. So like he played football in the Ivy League, and then I'm guessing he wanted to get into, and that's how his little doorway was through Real World. Which one of the Real Worlds was the wrestler The Miz. He was on the Real World as well in New York. So, anyways, I know way too much about the Real World. At least once upon a time. Anyways, he was the white bread college dude who just graduated college, and I mean he was. Yeah. He was probably
the clean-cut Ivy League kid.
Yeah, that's kind of what he was.
Gotcha.
And in those days, they were still like setting up quote-unquote jobs for these people to go to. So they had whatever job they had every day. And, yeah, you should go back and look at the reruns.
So it was like the original reality TV in a lot of ways, right?
Probably.
The whole Real World thing. Okay, all right. Well, anyway, look, it's
back to Greg Dortch.
It's really well done. I defy anyone to match the energy of Kyle Brandt during the whole Angry Run segment every week, which he really needs to franchise in some way. But Greg Dortch, absolutely, right? And then the hand plant. That was a great ad lib by Kyle Brandt as well. But it is remarkable to watch him. He got more snaps on offense in that game, Greg Dortch, than he had the entire season combined coming into that game. But when he checks in, just the desperation with which he plays is unmatched of anybody on the Cardinals team. He is so hungry for every single yard. His entire football career has been fighting for a chance.
Yes.
And that's the way he looks every time he gets a touch. He's just fighting everyone out there.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it is, I know with the previous staff, it was always Rondale Moore or Greg Dortch. I like that you were able to see this staff can find ways to utilize both of them. Rondale Moore clearly has the speed, and you're able to use him out of the backfield. I'm just curious of when you see Dortch have a game like he has, and he has these opportunities, it just kind of makes me wonder about the roles for each of them, and are they correlated? Could you be getting more out of Moore? I mean, do you guys still think that? But when you
more
look
out of
at,
Rondale?
yes.
See, it's funny because there's a lot of fans out there that are hoping you don't use Moore as much,
And you
so
use
can
Greg
use Dortch.
Is it really either or?
I think part of the issue right now is that you have a coaching staff that prefers bigger receivers, and all the receivers that they had left over from the previous regime were smaller receivers. And I think that's the problem right now. I think that's part of the issue is I don't think they want that many. You're going to have Hollywood on one side, and you're not going to use both Moore and Dortch because you want the bigger receivers out there. And in fact, somebody was asking, why does Pascal play over Dortch? Well, Pascal's only got 11 targets all season, but when they want another bigger receiver that might be able to block or just be a bigger guy, they're going to go to him over Dortch. I do like the competitiveness of Dortch. I try to ask him, if he would talk a little bit after the game, and he declined. And I have a good relationship with Greg Dortch. I didn't blame him. It was funny. That whole locker room was kind of interesting because I thought for the most part the guys were in a decent frame of mind, especially the defense. But you had the one corner of the locker room where Kyler's in his uniform the whole time staring into his locker. And then all the receivers were also like not in a good place. Dortch was in a good place. Rondale was in a good place. Hollywood was kind of just staring in his uniform pants, not looking good. Michael Wilson's trying to like get dressed and not really know what to say to his guys. I don't know if it's because of how the offense turned out or whatever, but I felt like that group with Kyler they were in the worst place compared to everybody else.
I'm going to take a guess it had a lot to do with 3rd and 4th down.
Probably.
Certain receivers maybe weren't in the right spots. You obviously didn't have the conversions on 3rd and 4th down. Cardinals are near the bottom of the league on 4th down. The head coach and the offensive coordinator put their trust into the offense instead of kicking the field goals, going for it on 4th down, and they weren't able to deliver. So, yeah, the emotions were raw after that game, I think. And in terms of Dortch versus the other, like Greg Dortch and Zach Pascal might play the same position. Two totally different players, two totally different responsibilities when they're out in the field. Pascal is primarily a blocking receiver. Dortch is anything but in his capacity at his size. So
although Dortch
I
did
just
have
hate comparing the two.
Yeah, Dortch did have one really good block on, I can't remember what play it was, but I remember thinking, wow, Greg
I think it
Dortch.
was a James Conner run.
I think it was a Conner run.
Yeah.
I just need to throw that in. I'm not trying to cut you off, but I did want to note that Greg Dortch came to play.
Yeah.
The Cardinals finished 3 for 10 on 3rd downs, 1 for 4 on 4th. I don't have a problem being aggressive on 4th downs. I'm just curious, is there a point, not just with Gannon, but maybe, head coaches in general, is there a point where so consistently either throughout a game or throughout a couple games where it is not working? Do you just say, you know what, let's look at the analytics differently, let's try something differently, let's maybe not be as aggressive?
Well, and it all started with the Kyler touchdown run that made it 21-16, and then you go for the 2-point conversion, and he gets stymied on the 2-point conversion run, and at that point, I get it. You want to get it to a 3-point game, make it 21-18, and I've said this and I'll say it again, at that point, late 3rd quarter, is it realistic or plausible that you're going to shut out C.J. Stroud and Houston the rest of the way? I mean, at that point, you still have, pedal to the metal, high-octane, left-lane Todd Graham football right here, the former ASU head coach. You're going ultra-aggressive. You got to try and put points on the board to match C.J. Stroud in that Houston offense. Who would have thunk it at that point that you're going to pitch a shutout and hold them to 86 total yards in the second half?
Well, I mean, that's part of my argument of why they would do it. I'll be honest, I'm still very much in the you don't go for 2 until the 4th quarter at the earliest camp. So I didn't love that, but the way everything turned out, that point really didn't mean anything. If you kick the field goal and then kick another field goal, you still win the game. It would have hurt you if they would have gotten a touchdown. I do go back to the 4th down, and you and I talked about this with Wolf on Arizona Sports. You don't know, like you said, that the Texans are going to get shut out. And realistically, if it wasn't for a tipped pass that Chris Barnes intercepts, and then Antonio Hamilton with a big interception, they probably get second half points.
Right.
So I don't really have a huge problem with going for it. I did think it was interesting when Drew Petzing was talking about the 4th downs, and if it says we have a better chance to win 51% to 49% to go for it, we're going to go for it. That's that. Now he does say there's some gut and the flow of the game and everything, but I think that's where this was going. I think ultimately, I think when you crunch the numbers at the points that they went for it on 4th down, the first 2 times, the last one they had to, the first 2 times, I think the numbers were saying, yeah, Houston's going to score again, so you better go for this.
But for the record, Jonathan Gannon has said more than once when asked about 4th downs, how much is analytics, how much is your gut? He said it's always a mix of both. How the game's trending, how I'm feeling. in the moment, what the analytics say. Now, Dave Pasch told us a funny story on Arizona Sports that he was doing an ESPN game recently, and he was on air saying, well, yeah, obviously you're going to go for the field goal in this situation. At that very moment, the guys in the truck put a graphic on the screen that said, the analytics say go for it. So he said the analytics are always in the moment and updated and at the disposal of head coaches in pro and college football, and they're much more prone to following the analytics than ever before. So even though conventional wisdom and years in conditioning would say, no, kick the field goal in this situation, Pasch said, well, at that point, I was proven wrong by the analytics, or at least supposedly on the screen, and I had to acknowledge as much.
Again, I said this to somebody in the mailbag this week. If you because he was upset about the going for fourth downs, and he was like, no other coach in the league does this. And I'm like, well, first of all,
not true.
D'Amico Ryans did it before Gannon did on Sunday. He had a gimme field goal, and he didn't do it, and they didn't get points. But I also think that it's funny that you mentioned conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is going out the window real quick like.
Maybe the better term is conventional conditioning.
Yes.
Because we've all been conditioned to think otherwise.
Because the bottom line is where the sport is going and what the numbers are saying. And it's saying go for these situations. Because ultimately, if you go for it twice on fourth down and two different times, and one of you scores a touchdown, that's still, you end up with 7 points instead of 6 from 2 field goals. It's the same concept of why there's so many more three-pointers shot in the NBA these days. Because even if you shot 7% worse outside the three-point arc than inside the three-point arc, you're gaining a point on every one you make than what you would make inside. It's just...
But then you have the argument, okay, you can shoot all the three-pointers you want, but you don't have Steph Curry on your team. So is that in your best interest?
And that absolutely plays into it. But for instance... Let's take the Cardinals. I'm not going to do the last fourth down because, again, that was had to do the first two. If Greg Dortch runs 5 yards downfield instead of right at the stick and then comes back for the ball.
But can't I argue that the defense is always going to guard the sticks?
You can argue that all you want.
I mean, we can say just run to the sticks, but guess who's there? The defender.
My guess is if you're Greg Dortch and you start sprinting upfield and you do it right, that defender is going to get wary of getting blown past and get burned for a touchdown on 4th and 3, and that might buy you just enough time to turn around. But you can't come back to the ball. Then on the second,
and by the way, after that filled fourth down to Dortch where he got driven back, that was probably where the emotions were the most raw on the sideline all game. There was a lot of frustration on the sideline at that moment.
And I'm going to argue he didn't get driven back. He jumped back for the ball.
Came back to the ball taught as a receiver.
That's fine, but then you better be beyond the sticks when you start, because when you come back, then you're not in first down territory anymore. And maybe Kyler could have gotten the ball a little sooner.
And when he declined media interviews, I wonder if it had to do exclusively with that moment.
And it might. I didn't even think about that. And then the other one was the McBride play where that's a first down.
Oh, yeah.
That was not the wrong call. Kyler just threw a bad pass.
To me, it looked like Kyler. My initial reaction to it, and I know he attributed it to poor footwork later. To me, when I watched it in the moment, I said, he overthrew it. It's a pitcher trying to overthrow the fastball.
He was trying to aim it instead of just throwing the ball. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
There are two things pitchers can't do. You can't aim it, and you can't overthrow it. Yeah. And it looked like he did both.
Yeah.
Because I think in the moment, he's like, oh, my goodness, it's fourth down, and he's wide open. All I have to do is get it to him. Yeah. No. And skips off the turf, and it's behind him, and the whole deal. Which brings us to Kyler big picture, Danny. Here's the analogy I made. You might want to get the bingo card out.
Can I start calling her big picture Danny? I like that.
The whole aspect of how do we assess Kyler. Now, obviously, everything he does is going to be analyzed and dissected in the moment. Dare I say, and when I say this, I know it's not often, but let's just pump the brakes a little bit, and let's take a look at the entire sample size, which is going to be 8 games. And I made this analogy over on KTAR the other afternoon. It was funny because I heard it down the hallway on the other station not long after. Interesting. But I made this analogy that in the stock market, if you're going to go buy a blue chip stock, you buy it and just hang on to it. You're long the stock. You buy Apple, Amazon, whatever you want to buy. But you don't check it every single day or multiple times per day. It's going to be up, it's going to be down. But hopefully at the end of your time horizon, 5-10 years, hey, it's a winner, right? So that's the way I'm looking at Kyler Murray right now. Yes, great first game. Second game, maybe not as much in certain areas, obviously. So now, but guess what? You still have 6 games to go. Let's look at it when we get to January.
Well, first of all, Paul, know your audience. If you're going to toss something to me, you cannot throw it with stocks and numbers and expect me to follow what you're saying. I get the gist of it.
Or even keep interest.
I think I get the gist of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I agree. And that was why I felt so strongly against some of the national reports saying that it was smart for Kyler to not play all year as he recovered from his injury. You have too much to figure out with these games, and 8 games is a good amount. At the same time, doesn't feel like a lot, and you need to get a good grasp on what he does well. The things he doesn't do well, do you feel like you can help coach him and turn those things around? Is he the right leader, the franchise quarterback you want? There's a new staff, a new front office. There's too many questions. I am with you that just because it wasn't as good of a game and they didn't win, I'm not sitting here saying week 1 to week 2, Kyler regressed and it didn't look good and, start questioning his ability. I don't feel like that at all. I think Kyler made some good plays. I think to a certain extent kept them in the game when you were down 21-10 at half. Sometimes this just happens. I would still like to see, I think, really on the interceptions, there clearly needs to be better communication on the routes that are being run and when he wants a receiver to sit or when he doesn't. And I think when it comes to the accurate deep ball, I like that Kyler is taking those shots early on in his return. It needs to be a little more power, maybe, a little quicker to get the ball out. There are little things that I would still like to see improve the next couple of weeks, but I'm still impressed with what we've seen from him the first 2 games.
And we've had several people cite, his footwork, that he has such insane arm talent that he's gotten away with, average footwork in the past. Dirty feet, as the coaches will call it.
Good term, by the way.
So, okay, how much improvement can be made in that department? How soon? Can you do it from one week to the next during the course of the regular season? But whether it's been Rich Gannon or Brock Heward on Arizona Sports, former quarterback, it's a lot of different people. Kyle Vandenbosch even talked about it. And some of those throws, maybe the feet aren't even pointed towards the target. Some of the basics, because he has such great arm talent, he's gotten away with that in the past, and maybe that leads to some of the inconsistency, which to me just leads to the bigger question. Ultimately, when we get to January and you have a brand new coaching staff and a new GM, and it's not whether Kyler's a talented quarterback. Obviously he is, and he's the number 1 pick for a reason. I think the bigger question is he a great fit for this scheme? For example, Josh Dobbs was under center a lot more, obviously, when he was the Cardinals starting quarterback. But he also has wheels. He's a very mobile quarterback. So, all right, because if this Drew Petzing scheme came from the Browns and Kevin Stefanski, that's obviously predominantly under center and a heavy run scheme.
Yeah.
Nobody runs it like the Browns, and James Conner has that capability. But I think ultimately, you have to figure out, where is the fit? Where is the sweet spot between the scheme and Kyler's skill set, between his past and what he's used to and what you want to do going forward? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We just don't know a lot of the details. Like, for instance, when Drew Petzing was talking about this week about Kyler's footwork, he made it sound like Kyler's pretty much nailed it already. So, I don't know. I don't know if that's a coach taking up for a player publicly and they're still working on stuff or what that is.
Yeah, if the coach doesn't want to coach his player up in the press, I get it. So, I'm not exactly sure. But, you're taking on a Rams team on Sunday, and I'm real curious to see how Kyler comes out because according to Jonathan Gannon, he wanted to play the next day. If he's talking Coach Kyzir off on the plane and calling him during the drive home after a 2.5-3 hour plane flight home, and he's on the horn with the head coach again during the drive home, obviously it's front burner for Kyler Murray, right? So I'm curious how he responds. And I think Gannon and the staff want to know how he responds, because even the great Patrick Mahomes, and look at Josh Allen, had some really bad games, and he responded and he rebounded. That's what the elite franchise, highly paid quarterbacks do. It's not 17 games of elite quarterback play. But when it isn't, you figure out how to correct it and you respond the next week.
That's part of it. That's part of the growth. I think that was probably part of the growth for Kyler at this point in his career, not even related to the knee injury. And it was nice to hear from Gannon, because I'd asked that on Monday in the press conference of, there's been a lot of learning about Kyler throughout this process of watching film and practicing and the scheme, but what has he learned about Kyler through 2 Mondays after a win and a loss, of how he digests everything? And that was when Gannon was talking about how Kyler will watch the film on the plane. Then he'll watch the film with his offensive coordinator. And then he'll go to JG. And then he'll call him for more, to the point where JG's like, Kyler, like, I got to get into my house. Like, I'm at the gate. I got to get in. But that's what you want from a quarterback. And we've known that Kyler is competitive. I would expect to see maybe a chip on his shoulder coming off, if he's going to take the loss as heavily as he did and put a lot of that on him. I would expect him to come out with a vengeance, not necessarily against anybody but himself, but that's what I would expect based on what we know from Kyler.
By the way, I broke the golden rule on the sideline in Houston. Thou shalt not covet another team's draft picks. And I'm not talking about Will Anderson or C.J. Stroud. And by the way, C.J. Stroud is a dude, is he not?
Yes.
I mean, when players walk by on the sideline and they point to number 7, they go, legit. I mean, players know players. And a lot of Cardinals were really impressed by C.J. Stroud, especially that strike right before halftime, on the move, 40 yards, on the money. Tank Dell, ridiculous catch. But the guy I was looking at was Derek Stingley Jr., that corner. I'm like, what?
He's 2 years in, right?
2 years in.
Yeah.
But he was a top 5 pick. He was actually taken ahead of Sauce Gardner, which was probably a mistake. It's funny how the Houston's on either side of that, right? They took C.J. Stroud after Bryce Young, and they're thankful for that this Thanksgiving holiday. But they probably took the wrong corner the year before, obviously. Although Derek Stingley was dealing with injuries, and he had some moments. Anyway, he looks the part. 6 foot, ridiculously athletic, had that great, ball hawk interception against Hollywood Brown early in the game. But it's hard not to look at him and say, okay, what would a talented top 10 corner do for this defense going forward? Because that obviously could be on the radar come April.
Oh yeah, I would think.
Time.
I would think it's definitely going to be on the radar. We're gonna see cornerback on the radar. I think we're going to see wide receiver on the radar. And
do you really think over D-line and O-line? You think
no? I was getting to the line.
Okay, all right.
I was getting to the line, but I think receiver is absolutely going to be in the mix for what we talked about already in terms of the size thing.
Well, I didn't know if you were talking about one specific
I'm not.
receiver. If that's why you were bringing it up.
I do not think this team is going to draft Marvin Harrison, even if they have a chance to. Because I think they either take a cornerback or they go with a lineman.
Yeah. I agree. I think if they end up top 5, top 7, whatever. Yes, you're getting corner or lineman, and then if Houston's around number 20 or whatever, if you went with I don't know, Roma Dunze from Washington, the guy who's 6'3" and runs a 4.35, I'll take him.
That's the other thing is this is it's shaping up to be such a deep wide receiver draft class with some ultra talented guys that you're going to be able to get later in the first round, early in the second round, which obviously the Cardinals are going to have a pickup there too. So there's no way I don't think Marvin Harrison has any chance of being on this team. So I'm sorry if I'm letting everybody down now because you're all disappointed. But I absolutely believe it's either going to be a corner or an offensive or defensive lineman for that first pick.
I will say based off the cornerback discussion, because we know what the fans are thinking. We see it on Twitter, and a lot of fans want to call out one particular player in Marco Wilson. My question is, we have praised this staff for what they've done with this defense. That's JG, that's Nick Rawlis, that is all the position coaches. Sunday was a great example. You had a bad first half. Houston put up more than 300 total yards. You make some adjustments, you keep them scoreless, 86 yards, you end up with 3 interceptions. A great turnaround. To a certain extent, shouldn't we trust that this staff knows what they're doing in terms of when you're looking at the cornerback depth, which is not really there? If you're going to keep starting Marco Wilson, and you've been rotating between Kyzir Clark, Starling Thomas, Antonio Hamilton, there's probably a reason that when you're looking at what you have, Marco Wilson is still out there. I'm not saying he has had a great year. I'm not saying that by any means. I'm saying that if you're going to call online and say, hey, why are they doing this, this, and this? Who else do you have at the moment?
Well, obviously there's a lot of people that want to see Kyzir Clark, but I thought it was interesting when Nick Rollis was answering your question about
Way
why.
to go, Paul.
I tried. I didn't get very
but
far,
see, I
tried.
think you did, because that's really the first time where Nick Rollis said this, but anything of concrete, usually it's like, well, they're working on it, they're going to be back. Nick Rollis said he's working. He wasn't specific. He said he's got some things he needs to work on, and then he said, but I'm going to keep that between me and Kyzir, which to me tells me that there's obviously something significant that he's not doing to get playing time, and it can't be anything run-of-the-mill because the coaches doesn't want to talk about it. And that doesn't mean a lot with this coaching staff, because I don't think they want to talk about anything if they can get away with it. But I do think that there's two parts to this. And now, I mean, Antonio Hamilton laid on the turf for like a minute or two after that interception, not moving at all.
He was in serious pain.
So
got carted off.
It sure feels like they're going to be short a cornerback. You're almost going to have to use Kyzir Clark, and that means Marco Wilson isn't going anywhere anyways.
And that's why I asked about Kyzir Clark. I'm like, what else? Where else are you going to go at this point? Who else do you have at your disposal if you're Nick Rollis?
Do you change things up and see what Garrett Williams can do outside?
Maybe. It's a great observation. You're right. Maybe.
Or I mean, you still have the ability, and it's not uncommon for cornerbacks. You have the ability to play Marco and Starling Thomas 100% of the snaps out there.
I guess, yeah,
and right. That's happened many times.
Yeah.
I mean,
okay.
And you could just go with five defensive backs and maybe give them a breather here or there with Andre. But like other than that,
yeah, that's true. I mean, you know.
But if Kyzir Clark can't get on the field for some defensive snaps now, if Hamilton's down, that's not a great sign.
Well, and look, Cooper Kupp, last game out, week 6, 7 for 148 and a touchdown. And he's had success against the Cardinals and Marco Wilson before.
But is he playing?
Cooper Kupp. I don't know if he's playing or not.
He's
I
injured,
have no idea.
So I don't know what that means.
You know, and if he isn't, then you still have Puka Nacua.
I was waiting for you to say his
right?
name.
Wolf was rehearsing
I know you
that
love
name
a
on the
good
air. I'm
name.
like, what's going on? That Tutu Atwell, who's there, Greg Dortch, you know. So, by the way, Dave Pasch is still on the not-a watch list for comments he made detrimental
More?
at Tutu Atwell's expense from week 6, just to let you know, the National Association of
You have a
Diminutive
great
Americans.
memory. You don't forget much, do you?
No, it's right here. It's on the list. I have it in my LA Rams game notes from week 6. Pasch,
Golly, Paul.
flagrant offender, big ol' X next to Pasch's name right there. So.
Airing of grievances from Paul Calvisi.
That's right. Thanksgiving holiday. You know, forget Thanksgiving. It's Festivus. It's the airing of grievances. Danny doesn't get that one either.
I sure do. Thank
No,
you very
Festivus
much.
for the rest of
I'm
us.
telling you, my
Come on.
dad has watched every episode. Could probably.
So you don't? Or
Well, I would
by
like watch them.
osmosis?
Yeah, not all of them, but like the main ones, like those.
Did you guys
The
know
soup
that
and the Festivus.
that female turkeys cackle, only male turkeys actually gobble, which is why they're aptly named gobblers. Do
Did
know
you
that?
just Google turkey facts?
Right. Here's a good one.
That's a yes.
Frozen TV dinners were actually brought about by mistake. A Swanson employee accidentally ordered 260 tons of turkey for Thanksgiving in 1953. So Swanson said, think fast. Hey, let's sell them as frozen dinners. And there you go. That's how the idea was born. See, every great idea comes out of what? A need. And that's what Swanson had.
I feel like that was like the perfect ending, but I just want to throw in there like how you feel about Kyzir White and Leki Fotu going on IR.
Oh, boy. That was tough. Yeah, Leki was having a...
He was having a good game.
And you know what? When you see... It's so disappointing because when you see a dude, and he's a dude at 6'6", 330 something, and he's just got like a small bone in his hand that's busted.
Yeah.
You're like, golly, right? It's like a Mack truck that is immobilized because it's got a bad side view mirror, right? Like, it doesn't make sense, So, but based on the fact you have to use your hands as a defensive lineman and the risk to any further injury or permanent injury, it looks like he can't play with that injury, so that's disappointing.
And Kyzir White had played every snap up until that point. In fact, he played 5 or 6 snaps after tearing his bicep.
We actually, the great Zach Gershman actually did some video replay studying, and he says it was probably closer to 10 or 11 snaps.
Oh, jeez.
That Kyzir White played, and you can absolutely see it. Like, he probably shouldn't have been out there because he was basically being ragdolled around because he couldn't use an arm. Well,
and Jonathan Gannon, they said, man, we didn't even notice it right away, obviously, otherwise, and it's amazing. But when he came to the sideline, I had that fear based on where they were looking, and we've seen enough guys go out over the years with a biceps injury, especially a linebacker, because you're getting your arms out, out to your sides, trying to corral ball carriers and so forth. So
that's biceps 3, Cardinals 0. LJ
refresh my
Collier,
memory. Okay.
Carlos Watkins.
That's right. Yes.
Kyzir White.
That's right. Oh my goodness. You know what?
Protect yourself when you're at the gym, Danny.
I'm going to call the Butterball Turkey talk line and ask him about biceps injuries. What do you kind of response? Maybe we'll get some good advice on that.
It's going to take you a long time, right?
Actually, I'll text him instead.
Yeah,
that'll
text
be
them.
good. That'll be good. They have a 24-hour text message service.
I don't know that they get green text messages, Paul.
Wait, what does that mean? As he calls it a podcast here on Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation.